Two girls, 1, 9, 1, 7, and a little 4-year-old boy, and they have brown eyes.
It's the 26th of January, 1966, Australia Day. A euphoric day in the middle of summer typically reserved for celebrating Australian culture. The festivities are generally inclusive of drinking, swimming and partying. However, for two parents in the suburb of Somerton Park, Adelaide, the celebrations will be swapped with fear, anxiety and despair after their three children, Jane, Anna and Grant Beaumont, would go missing, never to be heard from ever again.
What did he do to make this house so evil?
What happened to the Beaumont children? It's a question that's captivated the public for the last 55 years, and despite a recently offered $1 million reward, a handful of incredibly compelling suspects, and one of the most extensive searches in Australian history, the case still remains unsolved. I want you to put yourself in the position of what you might call the typical 1966 suburban household. What does that look like for you? For one family in Adelaide, Australia, it looked like this. Two parents by the name of Jim and Nancy Beaumont alongside their three kids, Jane Beaumont aged 9, Anna Beaumont aged 7, and Grant Beaumont aged 5. Jim worked as a taxi driver while Nancy was a stay-at-home mum in their tightly knit cottage at 109 Harding Street, Somerton Park. This quaint little suburban house was a 5-minute drive from the incredibly popular Adelaide Beach, and on the 25th of January, a day before the kids would disappear, Jim would drop all three kids at the beach under the assumption that Jane, the elder sibling, would be responsible enough to look after her brother and sister. All three kids would return home safely that same day, instilling confidence in the minds of their parents that the kids were safe to look after themselves should they go back to the beach again. The following morning, on the 26th of January 1966, the scorching heat led the kids to return to the beach, leaving on the 8:45 a.m. bus, agreeing to return home on the 12 p.m. bus approximately 3 hours later. However, their mother, Nancy, would become worried when the 12 p.m. bus arrived without any of her kids on it. She would then wait around for the 2 p.m. bus under the assumption that they had simply missed the earlier trip, but once again, her children were nowhere to be located. The father of the children, Jim, would then return home from a business trip early after learning of their absence, and at 3 p.m., 3 hours after the kids were supposed to arrive home, he and Nancy would drive to the beach attempting to locate the children. However, they were still nowhere to be found. The parents would then visit the houses of local friends and family for the next 2.5 hours under the assumption that they had made a detour on the way home. However, still nothing. At 5:30 p.m, the parents would report the disappearance to the Glenelg police station, officially beginning what would become the most notorious cold case in Australian history.
What sort of a girl is Jane, the 9-year-old? Is she...
Oh, very intelligent, very intelligent. You've only got to tell her a thing once, and she always does what she's told, never to talk to any strangers on the beach. When she swims there, always in groups.
Be quite able to look after the other two.
Oh, quite capable, quite capable.
Within 24 hours, the whole nation was aware of the disappearance. Airports, railway lines, even interstate highways were instantly monitored under the suspicion that the children had been kidnapped. At the same time, local police remained hopeful that the kids had simply gotten lost and began to search the beach, local buildings, and the general vicinity surrounding the ocean.
So the first thing, over here towards this ridge. Right, you can break line now and come over.
However, none of these would prove to be successful.
Today is the 7th day that Jane, Anna and Grant Beaumont have been missing, and it's the 4th time that the police have searched this area of the Sandhills.
The kids had been carrying a grand total of 17 different items on their trip to the beach, including clothing, towels and bags. However, none of these were located either. After 3 days without any information relating to the kids' whereabouts, a £250 reward would be offered to the public, equivalent to approximately $3,500 in today's money, enticing anyone who knew anything to come forward. While the amount offered has since been criticised for being somewhat underwhelming, it would prompt many witnesses to come forward, and investigators would finally get an idea of what happened to the Beaumont children. Wenzel's Bakery, a nearby shop that had reported Jane, the elder sibling, came in to purchase pasties as well as a meat pie at around 12:20 p.m. with a £1 note. And while insignificant on the surface, there were two clues here which instantly raised a couple of red flags for investigators. Firstly, the kids never bought meat pies in the past as they didn't like the taste, and secondly, the kids had only been given 6 shillings and 6pence, enough for lunch and the return bus trip, ultimately raising the question, who had given given them the £1 note. At around the same time that the Wenzel Bakery sighting was coming to light, many other witnesses began to advise investigators that they had seen the kids walking around with a tall man in his mid-30s. The man had brown hair, was thin, tanned, and was wearing swimming trunks. Witnesses stated that the kids appeared to be playing with him and felt relaxed, enjoying themselves in his company. Now, this was bizarre, as the parents of the kids explained that the children were extremely shy, and to be playing confidently with a stranger seemed out of character. For this reason, it was then theorized that perhaps the children had met the man on a previous trip to the beach, certainly plausible considering they were at the beach only a day beforehand. This was also supported by an offhand remark days previously, when Anna told her mother that Jane had gotten a boyfriend down the beach, a statement that their mother Nancy had taken little notice of until the disappearance. After playing in the park with the man, witnesses stated that the children had waited for him to get changed and were then seen walking away from the beach with the man at around 12:15 p.m, just minutes before the bakery sighting, also being the time at which the kids were supposed to be catching the bus home. One final witness then reported that while at the Padawalonga boat haven, she had spoken with 3 kids at around 7 p.m. that same evening who resembled the description of the Beaumont children. Police would search the area, even going so far as to drain the boat haven attempting to locate a body.
At the Padawalonga boat haven in Glenelg, South Australia, in what is the latest development and perhaps the most dramatic one yet, the haven is going to be drained and the police will then inspect it.
However, this search would end with no particular success. With this sighting assumed to be a case of mistaken identity, all of the evidence pointed to this one specific man who had been seen with the kids on that hot summer day. Police would go ahead and draw various sketches publicizing his image to the best of their ability. With a mother and father in catastrophic desperation and a nation in shock, the only question everyone wanted to answer: who was that mystery man? Before we look at the potential suspects, we should first quickly explore a different but related case which happened shortly after the disappearance of the Beaumont children, and that's the disappearance of Joanne Ratcliffe, age 11, and Kirsty Gordon, aged 4, who vanished from Adelaide Oval 7 years after the Beaumont children in 1973. The circumstances of this disappearance were incredibly similar to the Beaumont case. The parents left their children to go to the toilet alone, the children did not return, and in the 90 minutes following their disappearance there were numerous sightings outside the Oval stating that the kids were looking distressed while walking with an unidentified man who had a similar physical appearance to the man on Glenelg Beach in 1966. The police sketches done for this case bore a striking resemblance to the sketches done for the Beaumont children, and with many other elements being similar such as the location, age of the children, and circumstances of the abduction. Investigators have often theorized that these 2 abductions were done by the same person, which will be vital when analyzing the 4 following suspects. The first possible suspect for the case is a gentleman by the name of Derek Ernest Percy, who was suggested as the kidnapper in an article written by The Age back in 2007. At the time, Derek Ernest Percy had been the longest serving criminal in Victoria after his first serious crime all the way back in 1969. At the time, however, for this first crime, Percy was found not guilty by reason of insanity, based partly on a psychological condition which prevented him from remembering the details of his actions. Percy did state that he was at Glenelg Beach for a family trip on the Australia Day that the kids would disappear, and was supposed to have indicated that he believed he might have abducted the Beaumont children as he was in the area at the time, but due to his psychological condition, had absolutely no recollection of doing so. Percy matched the police sketch in terms of facial structure, but at the same time there were numerous elements clearing him from the case. The biggest issue with Percy was that he was born in 1948, making him only 17 years old at the time, significantly younger than the mid-30s age range reported by many of the witnesses. On top of this, there were questions as to whether or not Percy even had a car at the time of the disappearance, which would have been a vital requirement in order to escape with the children undetected. Finally, Percy was in jail from 1969 for his first major crime as previously mentioned, making his involvement in the 1973 Adelaide Oval disappearance an impossibility, and considering investigators believe that both crimes were committed by the same person, this reduces the likelihood that Derek Ernest Percy abducted the Beaumont children. The second suspect is an individual by the name of Harry Phipps, who was highlighted as a possible suspect as recently as 2013 after the book publication of The Satin Man, uncovering the mystery of the missing Beaumont children. Harry Phipps was a factory owner and a member of Adelaide's social elite. He was known for giving out £1 notes, resembled the police sketch to some extent, and was later discovered to have a sexual interest in children. In 2007, Phipps' son Hayden, who was 15 years old in 1966, came forward explaining to police that he had seen the children in his father's yard that day.
Well, did you see them talking to Harry?
Yeah. I saw them come into the backyard from the Covey house. They came to Dad's car. I think they were inside the house, and that's it.
Did you hear what they're saying?
No, we're too far away.
A total possibility, as Harry Phipps lived only 300 metres from Glenelg Beach. We also mentioned earlier that the children appeared comfortable around the man, indicating that they had met him on a previous trip to the beach, and if they had met the man on more than one occasion, then it's far more likely that the person was a local. This would also explain why the kids had gone into the bakery by themselves, as Phipps may have had a hunch that the employees would have remembered his face from an earlier appearance. In 2013, two individuals who worked at Phipps' factory said that as teenagers in 1966, they had been paid to dig a deep 2 square metre hole in his factory yard for an undisclosed reason.
We had two men come forward who said as boys they'd dug a hole for Mr. Phipps at the Castilloy site at the year of the disappearance of the Beaumonts.
Police would then excavate the factory in November 2013 with the goal of finding information relating to the case. However, nothing of note was ever found. In January 2018, investigators announced they would go back to the site to excavate once again, this time digging further than before, however once again turning up nothing besides rubbish and some old animal bones. On the day of the children's disappearance, Jane was carrying a white clipped money purse. Shortly after Harry Phipps passed away in 2004, an individual by the name of Stuart Mullins came to the house to speak with Harry Phipps' widowed wife, Elizabeth. In the basement, sitting on a shelf by itself, was a pristine white clipped purse. Mullins then questioned Phipps' widowed wife, stating that Jane Beaumont had a very similar purse, to which she responded, No, I bought that from an op shop last week. Mullins then asked what the purse was doing down in the basement, sitting pristinely on a shelf by itself, to which Phipps' wife responded with, I think you need to leave. A few days later, police showed up to the property attempting to examine the purse, but it had been thrown out by Phipps' wife, creating waves of suspicion surrounding Harry Phipps' involvement. There's certainly a possibility that Phipps' widowed wife had thrown the purse out as she was attempting to avoid more negative press towards her recently passed away husband, but regardless, it was still somewhat of a suspicious action. The next suspect is Arthur Stanley Brown, a Queensland man who in 1998 was charged with the abduction of both a 5- and 7-year-old girl back in 1970, approximately 4 years after the Beaumont disappearance in 1966, and 3 years before the Adelaide Oval disappearance in 1973. The nature of the 1970 abduction for which he was being charged, as well as the general timeline, made him a compelling suspect. But perhaps the best piece of evidence was his eerie resemblance to the police sketches for both the Beaumont and Adelaide Oval disappearance. In 1998, when Arthur Stanley Brown showed up on the television for the abduction of the 5- and 7-year-old girls in Queensland, a witness from the Adelaide Oval case identified the man instantly as the person involved in the Adelaide Oval disappearance more than 25 years previously. Many witnesses for the Adelaide Oval abduction stated that the man in question had been seen wearing a wide-brimmed, low, flat-crowned hat, which was uncharacteristic of Adelaide at the time and was very common amongst people living in the hot northern parts of Australia where Brown had been living at the time. An acquaintance of Arthur Stanley Brown had recalled a conversation in their past where Brown had claimed to have seen Adelaide's Festival Theatre when it was almost finished, placing him in Adelaide around June 1973, just 2 months before the Adelaide Oval abductions in August 1973. There's a lot of evidence highlighting Arthur Stanley Brown for the Adelaide Oval abductions, but little for the Beaumont disappearance besides the potential link between the cases and the similar police sketch. At the time of Brown's arrest in 1998, he was 86 years old, had Alzheimer's, dementia, and was deemed unfit to stand trial. He died 4 years later in 2002 at the age of 90, never having mentioned anything to do with the Adelaide Oval or Beaumont disappearances. The final suspect for the case is an individual by the name of Bevan Spencer von Einem, who was convicted of a similar crime towards a 15-year-old boy in 1984. The most compelling piece of evidence for von Einem being the mystery man on the beach was that he actually admitted to it. An informant known only by the name of Mr. B came forward to police explaining that von Einem had bragged about taking 3 children from a beach several years earlier. Von Einem stated that he had taken the kids home and performed brilliant surgery on them and had connected them up. Apparently one of the children passed away in the process, and as a result von Einem had to take care of the other 2, eventually dumping them in bushland south of Adelaide. Von Einem also admitted to taking 2 girls from an Adelaide football match, but refused to give further details. Von Einem did fit the police sketch to some extent, however him being only 19 years old in 1966 made him significantly younger than the mid-30s age range reported by witnesses. Von Einem also came off as the kind of psychopath who would lie about specific well-known crimes purely to increase his notoriety. Von Einem is one of the few potential suspects still alive, so should he be guilty, a further explanation at a later date could still be a possibility. 2 years after the disappearance in 1968, the Beaumont Beaumont parents received 2 letters that had apparently been written by Jane, the eldest daughter, stating that they had been living a relatively pleasant life with the man who had taken them. The letter stated that the man had appointed himself guardian of the children and was willing to hand them back to the parents, with the meeting location mentioned in the letter. The Beaumont parents, along with a detective, would go to the specific meeting place, however, no one ever showed up. Another letter was then sent to the Beaumont parents stating that he had decided not to return the children after noticing that there was a detective present at the prior meeting, and no further letters were ever received. 24 years later, in 1992, with the help of new forensic technology, the letters were traced back to a 41-year-old man who had written them at the age of 17 for a prank. Because of the time elapsed, the man was never charged with any offense. After the case gained international attention, a psychic by the name of Jared Croisset was controversially brought to Australia to help with the investigation. His search for the children was consistently unsuccessful, and his story had been changing every single day based on different hunches. He eventually believed that their bodies had been buried under new concrete in a warehouse close to the kids' primary school. The warehouse owners were reluctant to excavate based on nothing but a psychic's assumption, but eventually did so after $40,000 was publicly raised to have the building demolished. Unsurprisingly, no remains or any evidence relating to the Beaumont case was ever found in the dig. Following the kids' disappearance, Jim and Nancy Beaumont continued to reside in the same Somerton Park home, stating that it would have been dreadful if the kids were to return home but did not find their parents waiting for them when they got there. Jim and Nancy separated in the 1980s and eventually divorced sometime later, selling the infamous Somerton Park home where so much grief had been experienced. Nancy passed away in an Adelaide nursing home on the 16th of September 2019 at the age of 92, never having found out what happened to her children. However, Jim, now aged in his 90s, continues to reside in Adelaide, assumably holding on to a glimmer of hope that the case may be solved before he passes on to the next stage in his cosmic journey. In January 2019, South Australian Premier Jay Weatherill stated that the South Australian police had never given up on the case, and that they have a policy that no murder investigation ends up in a closed file. The South Australian government maintains a $1 million reward for any information relating to the disappearance of the Beaumont children.